You're going to struggle. You're going to suffer. And there are going to be days when you are ready to quit. But the pain will be worth it. And if you stick with your dream long enough, you'll get through it.
Our father grew up in Marrowbone, Kentucky, which is in Cumberland County, which is near the Tennessee border. Our mother grew up in Glasgow, which is where we grew up.
Anybody of that generation, they will talk about the Depression. And in the Depression, her father was a small town country doctor. These little towns, the banks just vanished. There's no money. There's no money for farmers, for laborers, and there's no money for lawyers and doctors. The whole spectrum was just financially annihilated. Well, she won the spelling bee at her high school. So when you win the spelling bee, you get to go to, back then, you got to go to Louisville to compete. Well, they didn't have enough money to buy the train ticket from Cave City to Louisville. Well, all the kids in the class, they brought nickels and dimes for her and her mother to catch the train, to buy a train ticket from Cave City to Louisville. And so she told that story all the time. And she always told it as that, you think it's bad now? I'll tell you about deprivation. These were times when we had nothing to rely on but each other. My dad was in Cumberland County. They had a little town called Marrowbone. What a great name, right? Marrowbone. And my mom grew up in Glasgow, which is Barron County. So that was 2 counties away. But they became acquainted with each other probably about the late 1930s. And they were married about 1949. That's when after the war. They were interesting. They were both Navy veterans in World War II. And she was an officer and he wasn't. So she outranked him the rest of their lives.
Tom Brokaw wrote in The Greatest Generation, so many of young Americans went off to war, and after they had gone overseas, many of them, they came back home to small towns and they contributed. They made their small towns grow, and they brought the values that they'd learned through that greatest generation in World War II back to America and grew the country. Yeah, well, our dad was really an entrepreneur growing up, and then his mother and father were in the general store business. They had a little general store in Marrowbone. When they moved to Glasgow, our grandfather, Gray, got into a locker plant business and the ice plant business. Now, they were great up until General Electric came along with the refrigerator and the air conditioner, which put both of those businesses pretty much out of business. So our dad said when he got into the construction business, he wanted to get into a business that General Electric could not put him out of, which was a big deal. We always have remembered that, because it may not be the best industry or the best business, because it's a very aggressively competitive industry, but it's one that, because of its fragmentation, because there are so many players in it, it's really hard for any one company to become a General Motors, for example, of construction.
Yeah, that's the thing about a construction business. If you are given to hustling, and I mean getting up and getting after it every day, and trying to figure out a deal, then it's what they call low barrier to entry industry. You know, you can get started pretty quick with a minimum amount of capital. You can get going, and they did. But the other thing about it was, I think is so present, was they both very much enjoyed the aspect of business that had to do with friendships. They built the business on friendships. People do business with people they like. And that's a strong part of the culture, and I think it's so much remains to this day. The second value of the business is being customer and relationship driven. And that second part of the customer part of it's pretty easy, right? No customer, no business. But the second part of that, the relationship part, that's what we forget so often, is that relationships have that little magical piece of being able to turn into friendships. And they felt that, and they enjoyed that, and they had just a nice social presence and a social awareness to build a business that way. But
of course, the pivotal part of our lives occurred when our father got sick in 1972. It was July of 1972 when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And 2 months to the day, September 20th, after his surgery, he died. And the whole family was there in Louisville at the hospital. After the funeral, a few days later, we all gathered, I'll never forget this, in the living room at our house in Glasgow. And the subject was, okay, what now? These were tough times. And about 3 years after Dad passed away, the fellows who had really been close to him in the business, then a small fledgling business still in Glasgow, maybe 30 employees total, but the fellows who had been close to him decided that they were going to leave and start their own business. Mother had become more active in the business, but wasn't there in a day-to-day way. So it was a really, really challenging time. Another 5 years forward, we are upside down. Had $1 million deficit net worth, no working capital, and a lot of hope that we could get out of it. A lot of aspiration that we could get out of it, but there was very little evidence that we would be able to.
The advice was to shut the business down, declare bankruptcy, and walk away from it. They had 2 big strikes going for them. 3. They're in the construction industry, high risk. Bankers don't want to throw up a bunch of money with very little collateral. 2 was 2 of the principals were under 25 years old. You want to loan $1 million to those guys? And then the third one was my mom, a woman in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, in the mid to late 70s. To get that kind of money in those kind of situations, $1 million is a ton of money back then, right? Well, to get that kind of money back then, they had to rely on deep friendships and trust and the belief that, okay, you guys are going to pull this thing out. Well, she said, let's do this, let's get this loan, and we'll be better off for it. For all the pain and the suffering that we're going through, we'll get through it.
Mother was very generous at that time. We started a whole new company to overcome and restructure. And that whole new company became Gray Inc., or was Gray Inc. My brother Howard, he managed to cobble together $250,000. I managed to cobble together $250,000. Mother put in $100,000, and we were able to borrow another $400,000, which gave us $1 million, which basically, if you do the math, we had $1 million deficit net worth. We had a new $1 million in working capital for the new company. So that means we were at zero. We were operating with zero, essentially zero working capital. And this is when Mother's role really emerged in another way. She became an ambassador.
We were just starting to move into the Japanese work in Kentucky, and that's a whole nother story that you can go down sometime. There was a Japanese project that we just had to have. The gas tank was just about empty, but we had to have this job. Well, the customer was coming to visit us in Glasgow, and there were 2 Japanese gentlemen, and they were visiting just for the day. But my mom was like, well, what do you mean they're visiting just for the day? Yeah, well, they're just going to visit for the day and they're going to go back to Nashville. And she was like, well, that's silly. Let's invite them to our home for dinner. Now remember, that was probably 1975, 1940. That was only 30 years after World War II had ended. So small town, a lot of veterans had clearly not gotten beyond the war. Because there's really few things more special than inviting someone into your home and breaking bread around your table. It goes back to this thing about relationships. And relationships are fostered around two things. When you know something about somebody, something special, and then when it's around food. You know, it just kind of served to take the edge off a business relationship. Winning customers it's a courtship, and it's climbing that ladder of trust. You know, they take a step up the ladder, you take a step up the ladder. A lot of times, if you can get them around that table, you take 3 or 4 steps just like that.
Mother was very empathetic, and she was very generous. When she was at the office, I remember that she would always go around to different folks in the office, talking to them, encouraging them, just a little word of encouragement. She didn't go overboard. She was never high of praise. It was just enough to, check on folks. How you doing? Retaining the interest and the vigor and the inspiration of people and their enthusiasm is a big challenge of any business. Big challenge. So that means treating people right. That's why one of our core values is treating others the way you'd like to be treated.
I don't think she ever had essentially a financial goal in mind, or you're going to have 2,000 employees, you're going to do this much in revenue, you're going to be this profitable. I don't think it was ever about that. I think she just always felt that if you were pretty grounded in your values and you led the business as a decent example of a good person, that good things would eventually happen. And if you had a little bit of ambition about you, in a good way, right? Not ambition just for this, not growth for the sake of growth and big numbers for the sake of big numbers, but a growing institution that you've had an impact, that you have helped to instill a culture of growth. The business isn't just growing, or the institution's not just growing. There are many people there that are growing with it. And both of those things have to happen together. One thing we like to say is that personal growth has to come before the institution grows.
I think our father's untimely death meant that we had a dream that we wanted to carry on. And that dream was really inspirational, and it would get you up in the morning, it'd keep you going. At first it was thinking, okay, we want to be the best and the biggest construction company in Kentucky. And when we were trying to be the biggest, we went into the headwinds and insolvency and bankruptcy and recovery, which then pulled us back to say, no, let's focus on being the best. And by focusing on being the best, really focusing on being the best, that means focusing on your people, growing the people, training, reinforcement, addressing difficult, sometimes thorny problems. The longer you put off dealing with a problem, the worse it gets. And it's often running against the grain. It's tough. Work avoidance is conflict avoidance. Sometimes we have to engage conflict to get work done. And that's a huge, huge challenge for a lot of people. How do you navigate engaging conflict and engaging the work that has to be done in effective problem solving? That's the real challenge.
Why is it important that we take chances? Because those chances, there's some percentage of those chances, those risks, those rolls of the dice that are going to get through. and something positive is going to happen through those. And when they do, you're going to have a dramatic impact on other people's lives.